I'm a doctor who regularly treats people with an underactive thyroid, and today I'm going to tell you why this doesn't have to be as miserable as you might have been told. Sure, you still need to avoid certain foods with an underactive thyroid, but maybe not in the way you might think. I'll go through what you can't have as well as what you should have, but a word of warning. One of them might be a little bit controversial. Let's start with what you can't have before we move on to what's good. So you might be a little bit surprised that this list isn't as long as you might think. In fact, there's only one food on this list. It's a food that's super rich in iodine, and I'm sorry to tell you that you're going to have to cut back on all that kelp. Although we need iodine to make thyroid hormone, having too much of it, which we're at risk of by eating kelp, can actually worsen hypothyroidism. So that's it, not too bad, eh? But what about all those other foods you've been told to avoid? Well, let's have a closer look at that, as well as looking at one obvious food that I've left out. There are a lot of foods out there that you've no doubt come across through one means or another that are reportedly bad for your thyroid or must avoid foods. I'm going to go through them today and hopefully explain why they don't need to be as scary as they've been made out to be, along with some good news about a very popular beverage. So these vegetables include broccoli, cauliflower, kale, Brussels sprouts, amongst some others. Now, there's some evidence out there that these foods can increase the size of your thyroid gland, causing what's called a goiter. And there's also some evidence that they can affect thyroid hormone synthesis. But more recent evidence has shown that this is not the case when these foods are eaten in moderation. You'd have to essentially eat bucket loads for them to cause a problem. There's one drink in particular I see fairly regularly advised against, and this tends to upset people more than anything. That, of course, is coffee. Now, the problem with your morning brew is just that, the morning. You see, it can affect the absorption of levothyroxine, the tablet we use to treat hypothyroidism. But so long as you leave at least 30 minutes having the levothyroxine on an empty stomach, ideally more than an hour, then coffee shouldn't be a problem. When soy is eaten in excess, it can cause slight elevations in the hormone TSH. This is the hormone that we use to kickstart and wake up the thyroid gland to produce more thyroid hormone. The thing is, TSH is very sensitive to an awful lot of things, and this is only when soy is taken in excess. The bigger yet small concern with soy is that it can affect absorption of your medication, so levothyroxine. But so long as it's taken away from when you take your tablet and you don't overdo it, then soy should be fine. So we all know that the following one isn't good for us, but a lot of us are guilty of it to varying extents anyway, including myself, and that's sugar. Now, the specific issue with sugar in the thyroid gland is that sugar is pro-inflammatory, and that's not a good thing when it comes to the thyroid. So, avoiding sugar, keeping it to a minimum, is a good idea for a number of reasons, but it's not a definite no-no and rule it out altogether. Now, a special mention to anything that upsets the symptoms of hypothyroidism. Let's remember that an underactive thyroid tends to cause the body's processes to slow down. That includes the gut, so constipation isn't uncommon when people have an underactive thyroid. So it might be sensible to avoid or keep to a minimum foods that might make constipation worse. And they are, for example, processed grains, dairy, fried food, alcohol, red meat. Now, none of these are definite no's, but it's just being aware that they have the potential to make constipation worse than, let's say, water and prune juice and fruits. A lot of online resources seem to agree that this food should be avoided if you've got an underactive thyroid. Now, I'm going to go against the grain, pun intended, and try to explain to you that this food group isn't as dangerous and scary as it's made out to be. That food is, of course, gluten. If we go through a few simple definitions, they start to explain themselves. So, gluten is a protein found in wheat, barley, and rye. Celiac disease is a condition where your immune system attacks your gut when you eat gluten. Hypothyroidism is most commonly in the developed world a condition where the immune system attacks the thyroid gland. So we can see that the link here is the immune system. And in fact, if you've got celiac disease, you are 3 times more likely to develop hypothyroidism. But if you've got celiac disease and hypothyroidism, and you eat gluten, there is the potential to encounter 2 problems. Number 1, your immune system goes on overdrive in response to gluten. And that can't be good news for your thyroid. And number 2, the gut gets damaged, which can affect your absorption of minerals, vitamins, and levothyroxine. But here's the important part. If you don't have celiac disease, you do not get any of this, even if you have gluten sensitivity. And that's because the immune system is not going on overdrive in response to gluten. So here's my take. If you have celiac disease, eating gluten is bad for your celiac disease, but it may also be bad for your thyroid. If you don't have celiac disease, gluten doesn't cause anything in the way of that sort of a problem. It does have one small issue, and that's some people struggle to digest gluten quickly. In other words, it could make constipation worse. It's just to be aware of that, but I certainly wouldn't say you have to avoid gluten if you've got an underactive thyroid. So as you can see so far, moderation is key. Too much of any good thing is going to be a bad thing. But when it comes to the thyroid, there is one diet in particular that is useful and one food in particular that could be beneficial for you. First, the food, and there is some, but mounting evidence that this food can help alleviate the symptoms of an underactive thyroid, and that food is ginger. Now, it's far from being a cure, and it certainly shouldn't be considered in that regard, but it might help. Now, the diet. I'm sure it comes as no surprise to you to learn that food that is good for our mind, body, spirit, and mood is also good for our thyroid, which essentially is this: a diet that is mainly plant-based, supplemented with fish and poultry, includes foods like olive oil, nuts, whole grain, wheat and rice, Greek yogurt, eggs, leafy greens, starchy vegetables, and herbs. This diet has proven to have a whole range of benefits, helping with cholesterol, heart disease, dementia, and now likely the thyroid as well. And the diet with the most evidence and the most research behind it is the Mediterranean diet. I'll leave some more information on this down below. But perhaps one of the main ways that the Mediterranean diet helps is by being varied and preventing you from getting mineral and vitamin deficiencies. Now, another way of treating deficiencies is with supplements that are very common, and some claim to heal your thyroid. But which supplements do you go for? There's so many out there. And do they actually work? Well, to find out a little bit more about that, watch this video.